welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 3, Episode 20, your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. It's almost the 4th of July, and I am grateful to have been born in the United States of America. And I want to express my gratitude to you, dear listener, in the hopes that you will appreciate the good fortune that you have also had to be born in this country, right? We didn't have to sail in a ship. We didn't fly in a plane. We certainly didn't come here in a commercial trucking crate. Born in the USA. And what illustration is out there in the world today that will allow us to have such gratitude on this 4th of July holiday? Well, you got a war and then a coup in the country of Russia. And freedom. If you're looking for it, don't go out and start your own business. Don't become an entrepreneur because you aren't going to find it there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll have some gratitude now, a little gratitude in the beginning for each and every one of you that continues to listen to this podcast. I really do appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5 stars, write a review. If you like what you hear and you want to continue to hear it, please consider supporting. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. It would be greatly appreciated and would really help out expanding this podcast from a one-man operation into, wow, maybe 2 people. Enough of the preamble.
Act 1. What did the Russian coup teach me? Gratitude.
This podcast is published on Saturdays. So on Saturday, July the 1st, I will have an episode that is tangential, that is close to the 4th of July. And I was inspired to do a piece about the United States of America, land that I love. Compare the amount of time that you take being grateful, acknowledging how lucky you are to have been born in the United States of America in the late 20th century, enjoying the fruits of many other patriots' labor in the 21st century. I am actively trying to be more grateful, trying to have more in the way of acknowledgement in my own life. Rarely do I remember acknowledging, hey, pretty lucky to be in the United States, pretty grateful to be operating under the political and economic system that exists in the United States. And that's not really popular to say right now. And that is an illustration that the people who do not believe that the United States has an equitable, a fair, a humane, political, or economic system, well, they're not really paying attention to the rest of the world. And they certainly haven't been anywhere else in the world. Let's compare the United States of America in a sense of gratitude, in a sense of acknowledgement, you and I, dear listener, to what it must be like to have been born in, I don't know, what's a country that's on everyone's mind right now? What's a country that, outside of our own, appears in our news cycle on a daily basis? Which one would that be? Oh, Russia. That's right, Russia. We piss and moan in this country. Piss and moan. Oh my God, the sky is falling. Donald Trump is president of the United States. Oh my God, the sky is falling. One Joe Biden is president of the United States. You just don't understand the level, the extent of the corruption that Donald Trump has invited into our political system through his family, through his business ties. Oh, you don't understand how Joe Biden is wrecking the economy and has, if not as many nefarious ties in his family as Donald Trump does, maybe more. Let's compare that landscape to the one that they have in Russia, where they lived in communism for decades. People my age who grew up in Russia lived under the yoke of communism. I meet them all of the time now. People who grew up not just in Russia, but in any of the Soviet satellite countries. And they are my contemporaries. They are your contemporaries, dear listener. And yes, I want to believe that I'm talking to a bunch of 20-year-olds. I know it's not true. I'm talking to a bunch of people that I know who are my age. We are contemporaries with people who grew up in a totalitarian society that spanned a massive amount of the space on this globe and are now, what? Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Georgian, Kazakhstani, Polish, Serbian, Romanian. You go to a lot of those countries, but for the terrible music and but for the, I guess they would call it glamorous fashion, they look a lot like us. Communism falls apart. Hooray, hooray, hooray. You and I want to envision people banging away at the Berlin Wall. The reality is that not 2 years after that wall came down, the fall of communism, it was literally the Wild West in every one of the nations that I just mentioned, if not many more. Crime rampant like we simply do not understand. Natural resources being sacked. The news likes to refer to many of these people as oligarchs, but the fact of the matter was they simply became the heads of international crime syndicates that had the justification of state sanction. You think the government of the United States is corrupt? You think it's corrupt under politician A or politician B? Think about the government of the country of Russia, of Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. I mean, they have more natural resources than they do people. It was a free-for-all. How bad was it? How bad was it coming out of communism? The Russian people, in particular, the Russian people elected an alcoholic. They wanted so little control over their daily lives after having come out of the torture that was communism. Boris Yeltsin was a fan favorite. They elected him. He's a flat-out alcoholic. He's a I get up between 9 and 10 a.m. alcoholic, and I'm drunk by noon alcoholic. He's such a mess that he essentially allows all of the corruption, this infrastructure that's a combination of oligarchy and criminal organization, to basically take over the entirety of the Russian country. And all they had to do was stuff a little money in his pocket and not allow state media to raise too many eyebrows over the infinite faux pas that was Boris Yeltsin in the public sphere. The power brokers were happy. The people, on the other hand, well, they became more and more restless. How restless did they become? They wanted someone to come in and restore order. Yes, if we get focused on ourselves and we get focused on our community and we get focused on our state and then we get focused on our country, yes, there is plenty of corruption. There is plenty of deceit. Does it compare to anything that Russia experienced in the 1990s and in the early aughts? Nope. Not even close. The Russian people then allowed a man named Vladimir Putin to take the reins of power. He may have tried to take those reins of power and may have done so successfully anyway. Whether or not he would have been able to entrench himself in that seat of power to the extent that he did, I'm not sure that could have happened unless the Russian people were welcoming of that strongman, of someone that would come in and clean up all the corruption. Did Vladimir Putin do that? No. Did Vladimir Putin put on the veneer that he cleaned up all the corruption? Yes. He took down many of the oligarchs. He took down many of these international crime syndicates, and he often did so using the same type of force that none of those oligarchs and none of those crime syndicates thought that he would. Enter the Wagner Group. Now, in the United States, during the Iraq War and the Afghan War, we had ourselves this Blackwater organization. And for all intents and purposes, it was a mercenary organization because the media are weak and they will accept whatever the halls of power tells them to accept, that and accepting a lot of money. The word mercenary was ixnayed and the word contractor was inserted in its place. So Blackwater was a contracting service where ex-military could go and they could get private contracts for going into a war zone, that being Iraq or being Afghanistan. Well, there's an equivalent of that in Russia, yet in Russia, well, the lines between mercenary and contractor, that line never really had to be drawn. I actually equate the Wagner Group in Russia more to privateers in the 16th and 17th century in England. If you're not familiar, a privateer was basically a pirate that was just given a commission by the government, and the government said, if you want to do bad things on the international high seas, we'll sanction it. You can actually do it under the guise of the flag of England or Spain or France, as long as you give us a cut of the profits. As long as you give the government some of the money that you plunder, you can plunder under the auspice of government authority. That's the Wagner Group. That's the relationship that group had with Vladimir Putin. When many of these oligarchs fell down steps or fell out of windows or whatever happened to them that was over and over again in the Russian media referred to as an untimely demise, an accident, very likely this Wagner Group was involved. There is a paramilitary group that is affiliated with the Russian head of state that goes around and does a lot of his dirty work. You fast forward a couple of decades. Yes, the war in Iraq was a complete and total mistake. The war in Afghanistan was a complete and total mistake. We made the same mistake that other first world nations have made, over the course of the last 1,000 years. It's important, I feel, that I make that acknowledgement in light of what I'm about to say. Putin initiates this war in Ukraine, and there's a lot of speculation that the Russians are just going to roll over the Ukrainians. Well, the corruption that we believe to exist in our government, in our political system, in our economic system, and even in our military, when we look at it in light of what real corruption looks like, look at the Russian military in action. You have senior members of the Russian military that are basically using the military as a piggy bank, as a grift. You have a complete and total lack of coordination between different types of military units. The Army, the Air Force, the Navy. You even have a lack of cohesion amongst inter-service units. Units in the Army that don't cooperate or don't get along very well. You have units that are mechanized. They don't cooperate or get along well with infantry units. In action, in reality, this is just getting Russians killed. It's getting these soldiers killed. Yes, I believe the Pentagon, I believe the military-industrial complex in the United States is bilking the economy out of billions, if not trillions of dollars every year. We spend way too much of our money on our defense spending, on the military-industrial complex. But put the people in the field and they at least get it done. Does that warrant gratitude or acknowledgement? Yes, dear listener, I believe it does. That we at least have a military that is competent and cooperative in the moment of truth when they actually have to go into action. That they were given a failure of a mission in Iraq and Afghanistan is more the responsibility, really more the blame of the politicians than it is the military. The Russian military was so incompetent and was so corrupt that this Wagner group had to get involved on many different fronts in the war, and was the more accomplished of any of the units fighting in the war. And yes, certainly there were contractors in Iraq, there were contractors in Afghanistan. That was less because the U.S. military was completely ineffective and more because we did not, as a nation, want to implement a draft. Our politicians were at least smart enough to recognize that, and there was a lot of money to be made inside of this incestuous DC relationship between politicians, bureaucrats, and these private military contractors, aka mercenaries. Juxtapose that situation with what's going on in Russia and having regular Russian army units right next to these Wagner mercenary groups. This created such a dichotomy between the regular Russian army units and this Wagner group that the Wagner group started to feel isolated and alienated, like they weren't getting the proper support that they needed in order to prosecute the war, which culminated in what? Not a week ago, there being this semi-coup, and to the extent that it was even a real coup, who knows? You have so little faith in the rationale behind the war and how it's being fought that the Russians are now instituting a draft and they're just throwing people into military service with very little training, very little understanding of the objectives that they have. There is a specific Russian ethos. There is a specific Russian identity. It's 1,000 years old, if not older. The place is a complete and total shit show. We are, as Americans, a nation that is less than 300 years old. We are still wrestling with what it is to have a national identity because it is ever evolving, ever changing. For the 30 seconds to 60 seconds, for the 24 hours to 48 hours that we ever feel gratitude, we spend most of our time pissing and moaning about how things could be better. Who do you know in your family, in your circle of friends, in your community that got drafted recently? When was the last time you were watching the news and the head official of the state had to make an immediate public proclamation that the people who were committing the coup, who just also happened to be the ones that were the most effective in prosecuting this bullshit war that you started, that they needed to be denounced and that they would be quickly put down? This 4th of July, let's count our blessings. On our worst day, we have it pretty easy. Most of the stuff that we are concerning ourselves with, it's in our head. As I've said over and over on this podcast, the second that we decide that all the nonsense is done with, it'll be gone. It'll be absolutely done and over with. This 4th of July, my hope is that we rid ourselves of this collectivist victimhood and we take in all of the blessings that we have, being grateful for, acknowledging what it is to be born in the United States of America in the late 20th century, enjoying the fruits of all of the labors of our ancestors in the 21st century. We need not hearken back to people that fired cannons at the British. We need only look to what's happening in our world today that we can't practically escape if we look at the news, this autocratic nightmare that they call Russia. Let it illustrate for us, dear listener, how fortunate we are and how grateful we are as a nation to the men and women that laid the foundation for us to bounce up and down to the EDM.
Act 2: Starting a business does not translate into freedom, at least not in the short term.
I'm a budding entrepreneur. I pivoted out of one career, started in another career, started my own business to do so, and therefore I am a target of a bunch of social media ads. It is amazing how quickly they can give you targeted ads in social media, no matter what you're doing, whether it be for business or for pleasure. It's absolutely stunning. It's a frightening commentary on where our society is headed. In short order, I'm now getting a lot of these social media feeds, ads about entrepreneurship, yet the algorithm isn't exactly tweaked to those that have started a business and are looking for very select services versus a more generalized, a broader appeal to those that are looking to start their own business. So I can get everything from lead generation to specific accounting services to how to scale up your business, all the way down to here's a different type of business opportunity. Here's another opportunity that you can become your own boss, that you are the new entrepreneur. And these ads are complete and total nonsense, utter bullshit. If you ever thought about becoming your own boss, let me give you a little word of advice, dear listener. And it's not that counterintuitive, yet it plays to our ignorance of what it is, many of us, to start our own business. Now, personally, before we start on this segment, I did not start my own business for this dream, this fantasy, if you will, of freedom. Freedom being, I get to do what I want when I want. I have the freedom to work 3 hours a day. I can work from my home office, or I can work from a sandy beach in Mexico or the French Riviera. I did, years ago, mind you, work up to the point where I was invited to become a partner in a law firm. So I ran my own business, so to speak, when I was a partner in a law firm. Then I left that firm and started my own firm, me, myself, and I. It is not as much freedom as it is responsibility. Yes, dear listener, if you were being solicited to become an entrepreneur, and part of that solicitation is you get to be your own boss, and the entire posture around you getting to be your own boss is you setting your own hours, you being able to go where you want to go, do what you want to do, when you want to do it, and you're able to make $100,000, $250,000, $1 million, $2 million a year. It's all absolute and total bullshit. I may be preaching to the choir right now. Again, many of you are my contemporaries in age and experience and in business acumen. Many of you may have started a business. You may run your own business now. So I may be preaching to the choir. I wanted to do this segment for myself, for posterity's sake, but in the event that there's any one of you that does not have that type of experience and may be seeing some of these ads, those ads are playing to your ignorance. And I use that word, ignorance, in the most loving way that I can. You just haven't done it yet. What I find troubling is that many of these ads, these solicitations, because that's basically what they are, they're trying to solicit people to give them money to sell them some sort of program that they could become their own boss, and then they realize the extent to which it's not freedom that they've purchased, but more responsibility. That's what I want to speak to. I was not happy practicing law. I very often left the job in a state of dysregulation, one that sometimes I felt that I could alleviate with exercise and with a good night's rest. For much of my career, I alleviated that dysregulation with alcohol. There were a lot of things that I lamented and I gnashed my teeth over. One of the things that I did not lament and gnash my teeth over was whether or not my employer was out surfing on some tropical coast or living it up on some mountain chalet. Many of the people that I worked for over the course of my legal career were leading the same kind of dysregulated lives that I was. They may have had more money to show for it. They had the weight of the responsibility of running that business, which is what entrepreneurship really is. It's the weight of responsibility. It's like being a parent in a business climate. One of the things that I'm actively doing is separating myself from my responsibilities after business hours so that I'm not worrying about the business 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a very interesting dynamic. If you worry every day about the business, you're going to demand in your own mind some relief, a respite, a vacation. Yet you can't take a vacation if when you're going through that downtime, when you're traveling to go to this vacation locale, when you're supposed to be spending time with your friends, with your family, and your mind is constantly preoccupied with the business, you're never really taking a vacation. If you never really take a vacation, you'll very quickly burn out on all of the responsibility of running the business. Many people get into entrepreneurship believing that it's going to give them that freedom that they have been longing for so long in their lives. Yet the freedom was really in working that 9 to 5 job, or that 9 to 6 job, or even that 9 to 7 job. When you left the job, you left the job, not just physically, very often mentally. And you may say, well, I work really hard and I do the same thing. I'm worrying about my job all the time. You might be worrying about your job all of the time. That may be of concern to you. Take that little bit, because that's what it is. You think it's a lot, but it's just a little, and then expand it. How often are you worrying about your colleague's job? How often are you worrying about your subordinate's job? How often are you worrying about your superior's job? When you are an entrepreneur, you worry about every one of those elements. It's the staff. It's the business deliverables. It's the administration. It's the accounting. It's the technical or the IT piece. I worried about my job. I worried about things that were going on at work all the time, for years, for decades. And yet now, and only now, thank you, universe, for having your sense of humor, your sense of irony. Only now do I realize that much of that was in my head. I was worrying about the four corners of my job and sometimes how it touched other people. You know, when you're in a position of authority as an executive in a company, again, you still may be worried about other people. You may be worried about different types of outcomes. You aren't as worried about that organization as the people who own it. Now, some of you may say, well, I did worry as much about the organization as the owners did. And I say to you, if that was the case, you would have been better suited to go out and plant your own flag, because it's like worrying about somebody else's kids more than the kids' parents do. Why are you doing that? That too requires balance. And if you're that person, I'd highly encourage you to start your own thing, to go out and start your own business or plant your own flag, because you've been there. You know what that mental exercise looks like. What I would caution you on is whether or not you're going to experience in any immediate capacity, in any short-term way, any type of freedom. The parent analogy is apt. One starts a business like one starts a family, particularly having a child. In the beginning, the child is completely incapable of taking care of itself and is extremely high maintenance. How often do you hear new parents say, well, we just wanted to have a baby because we really wanted to exercise all of the freedoms that we have as young people? Does the fruit of one's labor pay off in the long run? You hear countless entrepreneurs who refuse to quit. They testify that it does. I believe as much. What I am cautioning you on, dear listener, is if you think that you're going to enjoy that freedom as it is presented to you in some Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or Twitter ad, it's fool's gold. It's simply fool's gold. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.